So I follow my mother, Sterling. My name is Peter, and I am Brian's friend. I was thinking, how can I follow my mother? And then I thought, I guess we all follow our mothers. So I've been wondering if I should cut this short, and I'm not gonna. So here we go. This is the paean for Brian. I first laid eyes on Brian on a summer night in July of 1977, the summer before 7th grade. We were at the Bogey, a teen club. Bo stand for boy, Gee stand for girl. My mother danced there as a child, as a almost teen as well. It was my second time there, and I was looking for a girl named Laura, who I'd met the week before. I was awkward, insecure, and there alone. I had all but given up on finding her and was walking outside the door in the dark summer night to take space. As I walked out the door, I saw her walking up, and Brian was with her, with his hand around her waist, walking up from the Boardman River. She introduced us, and somehow we lost track of her, and ended up spending the entire night together, laughing and getting to know each other. In many ways, it was love at first sight for Brian and I. We spent many days together for the rest of the summer, and by the time we entered the 7th grade, we were the best of friends. Brian lived a rich, diverse, eccentric life with so many facets that to try to grasp it and understand it fully would be like trying to contain and hold on to a cloud or recount a dream. Brian's life was as complex, quirky, and diverse as any person could live. As his brother of the heart, I am honored to share this with you today. This past Thursday night, we had a gathering at Vince and Marcia's at their home in Saratoga. Many of us who have been close with Brian for well over 30 years, along with his family, had a circle to share stories and the impacts of Brian had on our lives. Some of the stories were the classic stories of Brian lore, of which there are many. But what was striking in listening to everybody was that so many of the stories were unknown or had morphed into mythical legends. Again, a powerful testament to the boundless encounters of love and venture, and at times adversity, that comprise the complex and beautiful tapestry of Brian's life. I know that anyone in this room, no matter the years or reaches of your relationship, can easily conjure a story of Brian that well represents his bigness in which he lived. I'm compelled to highlight several key themes in Brian's life to assist in honoring his life in this sacred gathering of remembrance. Those are friendship, communication, dance, and music. On friendship, Brian was truly the first friend I had that gave me the gift of honesty and loyalty. I was a popular kid, and Brian, when we met, was a geeky boy with thick-rimmed teardrop-tinted glasses, with a raspy signature voice and a sense of humor that had no regard for conventional boundaries. We could go over the deep end, and then find out there was yet another boundary edge, and then go over that one, and so on. We spent most of our time laughing our asses off, listening to music, talking about life, and chasing girls. We spent countless nights at each other's houses, either me in his basement room on George Street, or him in my room at the farm. The farm was, prior to my family moving there in the winter of 1973, a 250-acre cherry orchard, or cherry farm overlooking Grand Traverse Bay, a part of Lake Michigan. We had 4 barns, one of them the largest on Hammond Road, and a playground, a grand playground the farm was, with barns, orchards, the pond in the middle of the orchard, grapevines, gardens, trees to climb, and endless adventures to be had. Of course, that was sometimes not enough for Brian and I, who would sit in the evergreens lining our busy country road that we lived on and place a purse in the road, the purse attached to a fishing line on a pole. The car would stop, the driver would investigate the purse, And we would reel the purse into the trees with all our might and then go hide. Yes, we were mischievous, but we were never malicious. We shared a deep sensitivity, emotion, sharing, and love. We shared the desire to live on the edge. During this time, Brian and I had other friends, but those 3 junior high years, if we weren't with each other, we were with each other with girls. Brian and I were both drawn to the feminine, not solely for the obvious reasons, but because we found it much easier to reside in the company of girls. Beside that, it was he and I when it came to deep friendship. Brian had a few more male affiliates than I by the 8th grade because he played football. But he was out of place in that setting, and honestly, he was the target of some teasing, which was very hard for me. I'd say that we, like all of our male friends, past and current, were born without the sports gene. Not that sports weren't fun to play. We had no interest in watching sports, though. Talking about sports or caring about them at all, professional or college teams, did not matter to us. But Brian did convince me the summer after 8th grade that if I joined the football team with him, we would both make more male friends. That was the most miserable fall of my life. And it hurt. He was better than I was, but he was no star, and neither of us played football after that season. And we didn't have many more lasting male friends, actually none. Just more people to say hello to in the hallway and feel maybe a little bit more connected, but it was essentially a failed experiment. High school was truly where it all began. As far as community, we found our people. They were the misfits, the music lovers. Not the Def Leppard butt rock burnouts, but the people who were finding the music that meant something to us, the B-52s, Elvis Costello, Jimi Hendrix, Bob Marley, Neil Young, the Dead Kennedys, the Romantics, Bob Dylan, Cat Stevens, jazz greats, and concertos. To name a few. All right. And any beautiful music that we could get our hands on. We would steal my dad's albums constantly. We attended the dances, but we often made fun of the songs being played and dove deep into humor, sharing an acceptance of each other's perspectives. The thread that this crew shared is loyalty and knowing that we had something special, unique, and lasting. Brian continued to pursue sports, but these sports were swimming, diving, water skiing, sailing, skiing, biking, and running. Brian led the charge on individuality and was open to all people. In fact, Jay Kraft, who's sitting in the room today, he said to me on Thursday night, "Do you know anyone at all who Brian didn't like?" Very sincere. And we could not come up with one person. Brian had a very open heart his entire life. On communication. As many of us know, Brian worked very hard to become present and honest communicator. He was a man of great integrity and care. Throughout much of Brian's formative life, Brian was very good about expressing himself. Given a topic of interest, Brian could lock into conversation for hours. If it was humor and laughing, he was a master. Though at times verging on inappropriate, which his closest friends loved, of course, because he said it and we didn't. He was focused, disciplined, and driven in his life, made things happen, and when he put his mind to something, he achieved it. For example, he had a paying job earlier than any of his peers at a pie factory in Michigan. He did well in school and was the first of us to own a car, a Rambler Americana 1969. It was a cool car. In 1994, I had one of the single most moving moments of friendship in my life. This was the time that he was living in the Santa Cruz Mountains behind 3 locked gates on a private lot surrounded by BLM land. I was living with my sister Allison and her boyfriend in Berkeley, and I was in crisis, having broken up with my girlfriend, not knowing what was next in my life, and sensing hardship in my parents' relationship. I was very much in need of Brian and our deep friendship. Brian drove me up to the mountaintop where he lived in a small travel trailer. This was Brian's retreat of introspection and diving deep into his discipline of music. Because of Brian's intense regimen, schedule, and in many ways spiritual practice, consisting of driving into the Bay Area from way up there to see his music therapy clients and returning home and practicing, breaking only for his precision nutrition. The man was a scientist and a mad alchemist, and he slept very little. He was in his music during every waking moment with clients, on the mountain, and even in his little Geo Metro. In the Geo, he had rigged a contraption on the driver's side window that held the headstock of his guitar, so he could drive with his left hand and work on finger-picking patterns with his right hand. And yes, he drove a 5-speed manual. He only did this when he drove alone, likely because there wasn't enough room for the guitar and a passenger. To get back to the meaningful friendship part, when Brian was focused, he was focused on what he was up to or thinking. He could multitask like no other, but especially at this time of his life, it was challenging to get on his radar. It was not that he didn't want to be present. It was simply for him to keep up with his disciplined practice. It was as if all of his energy was going inward, unless he was with clients, but then again, that was on his agenda. I remember literally cornering him and pleading for him to listen to my sadness, my confusion, and my despair. I was on his radar. And while others may have stayed absorbed, been upset, walked away, his eyes welled up, and he looked directly at me and said, "Please help me do that." This was not about trying to change Brian, and he understood that. It was about being able to maintain Brian for himself and for lasting friendship. He left the mountain 2 years later with a new commitment: outwardness, community, and integration. One could not have occurred without the other. On dance, the man could move. He could squirm. He could bend, he could rock, he could lift and connect. The man could dance. There is no one who dances like Brian, no one. And as many of you in the room know, there was nothing like looking into Brian's eyes as the energy of the dance was all around. We all love to dance with Brian. I remember the beginning of dancing with Brian at junior high and high school dances. We refused to play air guitar, and we loved to slow dance, especially the slow dances that busted into jams like Come Sail Away and Stairway to Heaven. Best of both worlds they were. New wave and punk rock grabbed us, and we had a local ska band called the Microtones who provided a venue for a bunch of us 19-year-olds who danced so hard together that the band spoke to us after their gigs. While they were happy for our attendance, they weekly told us, "You have to keep this under control," and agree we would, and compare our dance wounds on the way home. We skanked hard until we were soaked and sometimes bleeding every Sunday night. In the June of 1985, most of us saw our first Grateful Dead show outside of Cleveland, Ohio, and from there, well, many of you are from the Bay Area. You may know we are faithful. We weren't the groupie kind, and I guess that was the irony of the Deadhead. Many of us don't think of us as the groupie kind. We just love an Americana blues-inspired, infused, psychedelic hoedown, where being nice to each other is the norm, and dancing together is the joy of it all. Brian loved, and for good reason, the music, and Jerry Garcia was of Brian's most inspiring musicians. He could talk for hours about the music, got the phone numbers, and met several of the members of the band. But he was never a typical head. Typical heads, you know the type, they walk around in patchwork pants with their finger in the air saying, "I need a miracle. Buy your kind veggie burrito over here." But Brian took immense pride in the fact that he would go to a show without a ticket, get out his guitar, and play endless versions, guitar-shinistic style, of Dead tunes with his eyes closed until he was gifted a ticket. He accessed many, many shows doing what he did. The Dead adage stands with Brian. He isn't the best at what he does, but he is the only one who does what he does. And God bless the Grateful Dead. Of course, this was not it for Brian, because Brian was not one for favorites and the limitations that favorites impose. Brian simply wanted to dance and expand Brian. And expand. Brian had a very rich salsa phase, and even though I don't dance salsa, Brian would take me to dances at some hotel room in the East Bay in the mid-90s. I don't salsa, it's a hip thing, I'm okay with it. But I would watch him, and he made friends with all the people there and had several dance partners. Many of you can speak more to Brian's dance journey here in the Bay Area, but while Brian loves community and a good festival, he often equated the quality of the festival, the party, the burn, on the dances that happened there, and would tell elaborate tales and write songs about them. On music, I'm not sure how to capture this, but I have to say that Brian lived in music for music. While he knew he loved music and dance, none of us knew Brian was a musician until he was 18. Bill and I were vice president and band president our senior year. We were involved in marching band, symphonic band, jazz band, the school musicals, talent shows. Brian admired our involvement, but he himself did not think of himself as a musician until after high school, when he got his first guitar. And in Brian's big, focused energy, he revealed the musician, the true musician he was in a very short period of time. He had his guitar with him everywhere he went, driving us crazy with hundreds of playings of the intro to Sweet Home Alabama. And then he went to college. John Musson, who is here today, shared on Thursday how Brian pursued his studies at Michigan State University by getting a degree with two majors, one in psychology and one in music. He literally helped establish their now existing program in music therapy. He designed his future with his persistence and conviction. He learned to read music, how to score pieces, and became an exquisite classical guitarist. He was largely influenced by the music of Michael Hedges and adapted Michael's style of playing the whole guitar, embodying it, and literally dancing his musical style. Brian had perfected making little shakers out of ping pong balls cut in half, filled with ball bearings, epoxied shut, fixing them to his fingers for percussive effects. He stood tall, looked towards the sky, and shined. For anyone who watched this big energy manifest in music, they witnessed. Brian was not overly concerned about what others thought of his music, though he wanted people to access it. He did not adapt it for the commoner, seeking that hook. He simply knew what he had to play. It was his drive, his passion, his soul, and one doesn't craft a deliberate soul. It is not intentional. When revealed, honestly, it just is. Brian didn't just play the guitar. He mastered the harmonica, was an accomplished hand drummer, played exotic instruments like the Shruti box, didgeridoo, and harmonium. He also played a piano. And in many ways, music played Brian. Brian's music manifests not only in sound, but in his appearance and movement. He expressed himself by the way he dressed, and like the simplicity of a six-string guitar, was able to adorn himself with so very little and make it big and wonderful. If Brian wanted to wear something, he would, without concern of how people viewed him. It was a bit contradictory at face value, if you think about it, how can somebody with such big energy, wanting to please others in such a magnificent way, not be overly concerned on how they presented themselves? One, because he knew he looked good, and he did. But ultimately, it was not about ego. It was about expression and being true to that expression. When I look back at photos, I often think, wow, he was wearing that when we were together? His shirt was unbuttoned how far? Check out those pants. And at the time, I didn't bat an eye because he was art and whole, so the gestalt of him was about the experience with him, and it simply worked. His music lived in his food, his potions, his supplements, his triathleticism and strength, his practice of breath, sexuality, caring, presence, and loyalty were his symphony. If all of Brian could play all at once, in all of their brilliant parts, in a grand orchestra, a ballet of the soul, a coalescence of love, we would find purity and true love eternal. And given that we, as a collective, maintain these pieces of Brian, there is no question at all that Brian did, in fact, accomplish this score. We, as witnesses to this beautiful man, are all better people for it and will continue to benefit from all he is in his big, kind, gifted, wild, loyal greatness. Allison, my dear sister, said to my mother Sterling last night, I looked at her. I can't look at her. She said, I thought I was okay by not saying something about Brian, but I want everybody to know how much I loved him. Suffice it to say, we all loved Brian. Every interaction I have had with everyone who knew him has a deep connection and a connection to be shared. I was going to play Brian's favorite song that I wrote on guitar, but I can't, because the rendition that must be shared is the one Brian and I recorded in 2004 in his living room, in his house, in Vallejo. So mote it be. Ho.